For those of us old enough to remember, and there aren't that many of us left, November 22nd will always be a day that stands out for us in the calendar. It, of course, was the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And even though it's 54 years ago, which is depressing for me to think about, it's a day that still resonates. It resonates for a number of reasons, but since we're in the television video business, there's one reason we should all know about what happened on that day. As Kennedy rolled into Dealey Plaza in Dallas on his way to give a speech at the Dallas Mart, Lee Harvey Oswald, seated in a window of the Texas Book Depository, fired off 3 shots and killed Kennedy. It was captured on film by a dressmaker named Abraham Zapruder, who shot the thing on a Bell & Howell 8mm film, and it's those pictures that still remind us of that moment. What makes this interesting is not so much Zapruder or what happened to the pictures, they went to Life magazine, but rather what happened to the media immediately after Kennedy's assassination, because in the 4 days from Kennedy's assassination until his funeral and burial in Arlington Cemetery, the media landscape of this country underwent a massive restructuring, and one that's still in place today. As the motorcade pulled into Dealey Plaza, there were 12 cars in the motorcade. Kennedy and his wife and Governor Connolly, the governor of Texas, sat in the first open-top Lincoln Continental. Behind them was Lyndon Johnson, then the vice president of the United States, along with his wife, Lady Bird, and the mayor of Dallas. Behind them was the media. And what's interesting here about the media is the order in which they went, because there was a pecking order of the media. The car immediately behind Johnson was the wire services, AP and UPI. That was the preeminent news organization in this country and in the world in 1963. Behind the wire services were the newspapers, the Dallas Morning Herald, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post. Behind them, at the back of the whole thing, were the television networks. Television was the sort of retarded stepchild of the media business. Nobody cared much about it. News in those days were 15 minutes. Hardly anybody who ever watched. There wasn't even that much television penetration of American homes. Television, especially television journalism, television news, had yet to really take off. What made it different was that as soon as Kennedy was killed, and actually, one of the people I produced at CBS News, Bob Pierpoint, was the White House correspondent for CBS News. He was in the motorcade, and he commandeered a car, and he went to Parkland Hospital, which is where Kennedy had been taken, and he grabbed one of the nurses in the emergency room and said, "Tell me what happened." And the nurse was crying, and she said, "He's dead." And Pierpoint was the first one to get this piece of news information, and he ran to the phone and he called CBS News in New York and said, "I have it on factual proof, Kennedy is dead." And CBS News went on the air with the news. Now, interesting side part of this whole thing, the local guy in Dallas had been sent to help out Pierpoint. His name was Dan Rather. And Rather went not to Parkland Hospital, rather went to the studio and had it fired up. And of course, when they went to Dallas live, there was Dan Rather in the studio. He understood television as a medium. Pierpoint had come from the wire services. He was more interested in getting the facts than getting on TV, but that's another story. But what happened in those 4 days is that television became the primary medium for Americans to get news, because TV had never faced anything like this before. It was still a very young medium. Not many people really understood or grappled with how it was done, and television news went live. And they went live really for the first time. In those days, cameras were these giant things that took like 20 guys to carry around. And on the next day, when Lee Harvey Oswald was being transported from the Dallas police station, he was shot live on television. I think it was on CBS. I mean, it was on all the networks. Maybe it was a feed. Live on television by Lee Harvey Oswald. The entire country witnessed this. It was absolutely astonishing. Today, when something bad happens, we immediately go to CNN or MSNBC because we assume that's where we're going to get the news first. Nobody waits for the newspaper to come out, and very few people even go to NewYorkTimes.com when there's an emergency. You go to television immediately. But in 1963, on November 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th, that was the first time people actually understood that you could go to television to get your news immediately. And television in those 4 days went from being a medium that basically was sort of very few people watched it, particularly the news part, to the primary news source for America. And even to this day, with the internet and with all this other stuff, an astonishing 55 or 65%, according to Poynter, of Americans still go to television to get their news first. But it all happened on November 22nd, 1963, 54 years ago today. Don't forget, like this, share it, and click right below to start your 10-day free trial with thevj.com. You'll learn a whole lot more about the television media business.